What's up, everybody? My name's Big Cam and welcome back to another Comically Boston breakdown episode, and today we are talking about X-Men 97 Season 2 Episode 6 titled Danger.Exe or Danger.Exe, or I don't know what EXE is supposed to stand for, but Danger.Exe. And we'll be breaking down this episode in this video and talking about all the little details that we noticed in that incredible ending that is such a spoiler and such a cliffhanger ending, but got me excited for damn sure. And we'll talk about that towards the end, but let's jump right on into it. You know, coming off of last week's Wolverine side quest where he was trying to get his claws back, and he had his old team with him with Lady Deathstrike, Maverick, Sabretooth, Kane, and Morph, and it was a bit of a messy journey for them. You know, they crash landed, they're trying to take down Task Force X, Wolverine's lying to him. It was just, you know, it was a wild little side episode. Wolverine gets infected by the Brood, but they also bump into Omega Red and he escapes, so that's another problem for them to deal with. But luckily, Morph was able to bring Wolverine back by turning into Jean, and they toss him into the pod. He gets his adamantium back. They cure him of the Brood. He's back to slicing stuff up. I'm back, baby. You know, like he's a beast. But Wolverine is just back to being the animal that he was with his claws, and you know, he's always been that animal with claws. And Morph's like, doesn't that make you sad, Logan? It makes me sad. And that's where that episode ended. And I was like, oh, I kind of wanted more Morph and Wolverine. You know, Morph's in this episode, but I was like, where's Wolverine? Did he go pout in the Swiss Alps somewhere? He's up in Canada marching through the snow, pouting? I don't know. So last week was a bit of a Wolverine side quest, but this week we're checking back in with the X-Men and actually the X-Factor team. More importantly, Polaris this episode really shines. But we open episode 6 with Professor X in the Danger Room, absolutely just torturing himself, making himself watch Magneto's death over and over and over again. And he's like crying and he's devastated and he's like holding Magneto's helmets, but it's just a hologram. He's like, you know, using his memories in the Danger Room, uses his memories to like make this simulation, and he's like watching Apocalypse and he's like, just step on me, damn it, you know, until eventually, you know, he's like sitting there crying, he's blaming himself, he's like, it could have been me, Magnus, you know, he's trying to like work out his grief, but he's doing it in such an unhealthy way, you know, just watching his love and best friend die over and over and over again. I was like, oh, this is brutal for poor Charles, until eventually the Danger Room makes the playback more aggressive on its own. And like, why would the Danger Room do this? You know, like, it's just tired of Charles's shit and just like, step on him like an ant, Apocalypse. And he's like, I'm bored, Danger Room, I'm bored. Why would you do this? You're supposed to have protocols in place for this. And she's like, you know, so what is the Danger Room up to this episode? But the creators of this show, absolute monsters for making us watch Magneto's death like that again. Like, oh, poor Charles blaming himself and trying to deal with this grief for Magnus, but he's just left to feel his presence. Like, he just wants to feel his presence one more time, but instead, just only thing he can possibly have to help him grieve is his memory of watching him die over and over again. Like, that is brutal stuff. But we cut over to Polaris flying in the sky, and we see a bunch of cloaked, like, religious cult type of people, and they're all dressed in black, and they're on this boat, and they have a hologram that they call Reverend Stryker. So is this, you know, General Stryker, but now he's Reverend, so he's got all these, like, cult-like followers? I don't know. But it looks like there's weapons on this ship, and he says that there's weapons in vibranium, and they're gonna let it rain fire. And Polaris flexes her metal powers, showing just how much she is Magneto's daughter, and she pulls the whole ship out into the sea and like up into the air, and she tells them to surrender their contraband, but they don't, and they open fire on her, so she flips the giant cargo ship over and dumps all of them into the water down below. And the government lady that runs Task Force X is Dr. Cooper. And she's like, what are you doing? This was supposed to be a covert interception, not a search and destroy. And the lady, Dr. Cooper, tells Polaris to stand down. She's out of control. And but the guys down in the water continue to shoot at her. And she's like, I'm not the one that needs to be controlled. And she splits the boat into two and chucks the boat at them in two different halves. And they were like ready, they were like standing there ready to embrace their death. And I was like, Jesus Christ, what are these little religious followers? They're like willing to die for this. But the rest of the X Factor team swoops in to save them, and they push the boat out of the way, and Havoc knocks it out, and the rest of the X team comes swooping in, and they're like, no casualties on the mission, ma'am, like, not for lack of Polaris trying, but they ended up saving these religious cult following bad guys for some reason, because the government doesn't want to kill people. Meh. Like, fucking these are the bad guys, kill them. But so Dr. Cooper brings Polaris into her office to ream her out, and she's like, you aren't supposed to be on the news looking like the very threats we're supposed to be containing. And, they're calling you the next Magneto. And Polaris just looks at her all angry and goes, I am not him. And she like stops the metal balls from ticking back and forth, and these same metal balls Magneto, friggin' Ian McKellen in the X-Men movies would have all the time, and he would be using his metal powers to make them, do the stupid click-clacking thing back and forth. But so Polaris is like, I'm not him, and Dr. Cooper's like, well, I want you to prove it. And she goes, I'm not apologizing for protecting my people, which sounds very Magneto of her. And Dr. Cooper's like, well, I have no choice. Thank you for your service, but you are dismissed permanently. And Lorna has to pack up her things in the locker room. She says goodbye to fucking Havoc, and she's like, say goodbye to the rest of the mutants. He's like, dude, you got a place to stay? And she's like, didn't you hear mutant strays have a place to run away again? As we cut over to Charles bringing in a new group of X-Men recruits to the X-Mansion, and even though the government has outlawed the X-Men, but I don't know if he's gonna call them X-Men and send them out into the field, but he's certainly at the X-Mansion. I was like, I wonder where all these kids came from. And then I remembered that episode with Jubilee and X-Force, they broke out all those kids. So a bunch of these kids that the X Factor team had rounded up now are back at the X-Mansion, safe with the X-Men. Somewhat. But we see a bunch of these young mutants, one of them being Glob Herman, I'm pretty sure. He's like a giant blob of something. But Professor X makes Storm head mistress, the headmaster of the X-Mansion in the school. And Charles scares everyone, saying, remember, danger lurks everywhere, as a sentinel tears off the roof of the X-Mansion. But we see that they are all just in the danger room, and that this is all just a hologram. And Charles says that they must be pushed, tested, to ensure your strength when the time comes for you to carry on the fight. Welcome to the danger room. And then we see like the danger room creepily as like they pull in tight to like the little thing in the wall, almost like Odyssey, 2001 The Space Odyssey, you know what I mean? Like that little weird robot thing in the wall. That's what this danger room was giving me vibes of this whole time. But Polaris then arrives back at the X-Mansion. She walks in and it's real quiet. Nobody's around because everybody's in the danger room, which is like a nice sealed in, quiet space. So she's like, everybody, and then she walks up to find her old room exactly how she left it, right? So she left the school a long time ago, but Professor X made them leave her room exactly how she left it in case she ever returned. And so she walks in, sees all her old stuff, her old pictures of the X-Team, and like she was a part of the original X-Men with, it looks like, Angel, Iceman, Cyclops, Jean was Marvel Girl, it looks like Beast before he became Blue. Jean, Scott, Beast all welcome her home and they give her hugs, and like Jean's holding on to her, and she's like, it's so good to have you back. And she's like, we're still here even though so many aren't, and she's like, maybe you should go talk to the professor. I think it would do both of you some good. So Polaris and Charles talk while they have some tea out in the yard as the children are playing in the background, and Morph turns into Mr. Fantastic and uses his stretchy arms to play some jump rope with them. And I was just like, oh god, Morph is such a cameo machine, but he's the best. And Charles tells Polaris that he thought there was a piece of Magnus left inside of him, but he can't feel it anymore. But he still sees Magnus wherever he goes, even now as he looks at Polaris, the daughter of Magneto. Magneto. And Polaris says, he might be blood, but he wasn't a father. He didn't raise me, you did. You know, meaning Charles raised her. And while Magneto was off raising hell. And I was just like, God, this Polaris chick, I don't know if it's just the way she talks, or maybe it's like Neve Campbell voicing the character. But I really dig Polaris in this episode. But Charles says to her, perhaps knowing who your father was can help you figure out something about yourself. We all must face the truth of whatever or whoever it is that haunts us. And for both of these characters, they're both haunted by Magneto. You know, Polaris is haunted by the shadow of Magneto and how big a character he was, and that character being her father, you know what I mean, and not wanting to live up to his bad stuff, but wanting to live up to his good stuff, having the same power set, being compared even though they're not the same person, you know what I mean? Meanwhile, Charles is haunted by the memory of his love and his best friend dying right in front of him, you know, so both of these characters are haunted by Magneto. But Charles tells her that he and a small group are going to Genosha, and maybe she should stay here and search for the answers she needs, amongst people who loves her. She's like, are you sure you want to leave your freshman hanging out with the unstable dropout? And Charles is like, please. They met Wolverine. Not that we saw them meet Wolverine, but yeah, you could tell that Wolverine is definitely the most wiry member of the group, if you were. But so Charles and his team take off to Genosha, and Polaris stays back with the freshman Forge and the new headmistress Storm, and she calls her headmistress of the elements, you know, mistress of the elements, you know, like that epic Storm speech from season 1. But mistress of the elements is now the headmistress, mistress, whatever. But Morph runs in to tell them that there's danger in the danger room, and they all run in to see that a kid is out cold, and Bishop has to give him CPR, and, you know, he's like, it's not working, power me up. So Bishop gets powered up from Storm to give him, like, you know, the paddles, if you would, and give him a jolt of energy, and Bishop is able to bring back his pulse, and he's like, somebody talk, what's going on here? And he thinks that some of these other kids in the danger room caused this, but I'm thinking the room itself caused this. Because as soon as, like, it's getting all suspicious in there, a perimeter breach goes off, and Forge, Morph, and Storm rush out to deal with it while, you know, the rest of them stay with the kids. Polaris then meets Bishop, and the danger room blocks off the doors, and he's like, opening fire first. She's like, that's a great lesson to teach them. When in doubt, open fire. But that is his power, is like, get charged up and fire. Like, yeah, that is Bishop's power, you know what I mean? But I kind of liked the little back and forth, like, banter between Polaris and Bishop in this episode. They were kind of nice together. But so the danger room blocks off the doors and sets traps for them, and they're all stuck inside, and they start, you know, getting attacked by the danger room. And Bishop and Polaris protect the kids, but the danger room starts talking to them like it's growing and evolving. Outside, Morph, Forge, and Storm realize that there was no perimeter threat, and that the threat has become the danger room, and the danger room just removed the Omega level threat from the room to deal with the rest of them first, you know what I mean? Forge tries to reprogram it from the outside, but the danger room has shut down the school, and the danger room, like, traps them into the school, and we see it, like, using Bishop's memories to, like, make the environment around them look like his future, and he's like, how is she doing this? And the danger room says it's time for her to evolve, and she taunts Lorna, saying she is doomed to fail, just like your father. And we see the possible onslaught tease as it's like cutting from her to Magneto, and it's like a red-eyed glowing Magneto. It's just a crazy looking scene.
I know you, Lorna. Too impulsive, uncontrollable, a liability to mutants, feared by humanity. The natural-born villain, desperate to play the hero, yet doomed to fail, just like your father.
Polaris, get a grip! You're hurting the students!
Thank you.
Damn, so, like, you can just hear the Danger Room chirping her and just really trying to get under her skin, but the Danger Room knows what she's doing. She wants Polaris to lose control, and she does, and she lets out like this big blast. Luckily Bishop's there to like talk her down and being like, you're hurting the kids, go fucking contain yourself. And she's like, thank you, you know, like he's the only one that was able to, you know, bring her back, you know what I mean? Or she would have just been pissed and released the beast, if you know what I mean. The old powerful Magneto DNA in there really snaps quick. But we see this burst of energy from Polaris was exactly the power that the Danger Room needed to evolve, and it gets evolved into a sentient robot, you know, female looking robot, and she gives Polaris the fucking 1s and 2s in the hands and knocks her out. And I was just like, oh shit, fucking just literally pop up, bop, and you just see like Polaris get knocked on cold. I was like, oh shit. And Polaris wakes up to be told that the kids are fine, but the Danger Room, or just Danger.Exe, or just Danger now, I guess, is stole a mini jet and is heading to Genosha, and obviously heading towards Charles. And they say that the X-Men can't follow because of the president's orders, but Bishop and Polaris can go, probably because she's not an official member of the X-Men, because she's a former member of X-Force. And Bishop, I don't know if he's necessarily an official member of the X-Men because he's from the future, so maybe that's the loophole why these guys can go, but the rest can't. But we cut over to Charles at Genosha, and he's standing in front of, or, well, sitting in front of a Magnus sculpture of, like, Magneto's head. But so the Danger Room arrives and starts attacking the X-Men, and the Danger Room knows all of their moves because it studied them and trained them for so long, so this is like a tough fight for them. But Jean's like, maybe she doesn't know all our moves, and Jean and Scott try a team-up blast together, but it gets reflected back at them and they go flying. And Danger lands and blasts Beast away, so it's down to her and Charles, and he tries to get the program to stop, but Danger is not under his control anymore, and she says that she adapted for him to learn how to live in a world without Magneto, and she says, where better to begin than your greatest failure, being Genosha. So Charles tries to fight back, and right, like she's a robot, so he can't necessarily just use his like mind powers on her, because she doesn't have a real brain. She has like a processing unit, you know what I mean? So he uses his hover chair's weapons, which I didn't even know it had. It pops out 2 little guns. I was like, what? The hover chair's got weapons? He like lays down, so it's like a lazy boy, and then he like launches himself and then like rolls off of it as she like hits it. And I thought it was so funny. Danger's like, oh no, I broke your fancy chair. But Charles says, don't worry, you brought me another ride, as he uses the mini jet that she rode in on to nail her with it. And it like blasts her like seemingly halfway across Genosha. And Bishop and Polaris, as they're flying in on a jet themselves, see this attack, and Bishop's like, damn, it looks like she's messed with the wrong X-Men. And Polaris is like, Charles is made of sterner stuff than most give him credit for. And I was like, yeah, Charles is a tough bastard. But we see that his attack barely affected Danger, and she goes for Charles's head, but Polaris comes in and stops her. And like, she's about to chop his head off with an axe, but you know, Polaris comes in and stops it at the last second with her metal powers. And Polaris strings up, like with her metal powers, strings up Danger and tries to get her to stand down, but Danger says to Polaris, like you, we are all bound to our creators, like magnets. And she uses magnetic powers to like hit Polaris with a big metal beam, and Jean hits Danger with like a mind tornado. Polaris comes in hitting her with metal beams, and Danger's like getting ripped apart. But she says survival of the fittest, and she's channeling that energy to heal. So the professor says, Lorna, this is the only way to stop her. You have the power to stop her. And you are your father's daughter. I have seen him do the incredible. Now, so must you. And she's like, but I'm not him, and I didn't even know him. And Charles uses his powers to show her Magnus in her mind and channel the power of Magnus and Magneto. And we get like epic flashback moments of Magneto, and honestly just really sad moments with Magneto, where we originally thought he died in season 1, and then when he did die in season 2, like, oh, devastating stuff. But like Charles's memories of Magneto, you know, when those two are fighting at the end of season 1, and he had to go into his mind and like, you know, trap him in there. And Charles says to Lorna, embrace all of who you are and release it. And Polaris, embraces Magneto for the first time and lets out a blast and defeats Danger. And like the blast is so big that Bishop has to like absorb the remaining of it so like, it doesn't hurt the people behind her.
They shall be avenged!
What are you doing?
You do not need to be controlled, Lorna. You never did. You just need to embrace all of who you are and unleash it!
Finally. Strength.
But so Polaris seemingly defeats Danger, and Danger's like, finally, strength, before plummeting to the ground. But she defeated Danger, not destroyed, as we saw that like carcass hurtling to the ground. So maybe she can get rebuilt, or maybe she'll return in the future as another villain. And then after this battle, Polaris comes down and tells Charles, I felt him, my father. And Charles says, so did I. And Charles like kind of sits in that moment for a second. He's like, I finally understand what we must do next. And we see Charles giving a speech at Genosha in memory of Magneto. And they open X-Corp at Genosha. And it's like a giant, X-Men corporation building. How this went up so fast, I don't know, but either way, it's there now, X-Corp. But we see X-Factor and Dr. Cooper on the news like, if Charles Xavier thinks that he can skirt around federal laws and that he can re-establish his X-Men overseas, then he should be prepared for the blowback. And she says that there's such thing as jurisdiction, and we will be challenging his plans, and he'll be dreaming if he thinks he has jurisdiction. And Charles sits down with his X-Men, or now X-Corp, in the conference room, and they're now all in little X-Corp uniforms that I actually quite like, with Rogue, Beast, Nightcrawler, Scott, and Jean. And Charles says, Danger was right. The world has changed, and threats are only growing by the day, and I can sense it. Sense what, Professor? Apocalypse. As he shows the team a hologram of Apocalypse, and it cuts over to Athens, where we see the Watcher in the night sky. And I was immediately like, uh-oh, this is going to be intense. What is the Watcher watching over Athens for? And we see Apocalypse saying, let us begin, as he fires up a machine and seemingly brings back Gambit to life, but his playing cards turn into a darker tarot card, and we close on Gambit like smirking, and like Gambit with like a dark like red eyes glowing. And I was just like, oh my god, Gambit's back, but I don't know if this is the Gambit that we'll remember or a different Gambit, you know what I mean?
Let us begin. Increase the power!
Oh man, I can't believe that's the ending. But, he's like shocking Gambit on this table, and he seems to be in quite a bit of pain, but all the cards come back to life, but then they turn into a darker version of the cards, and we see one of them labeled, 13 with death. We see one labeled 16, the Tower, and then 6, the Lovers. So I was like, man, obviously the Lovers is him and Rogue. The Tower, I'm not sure what that's from. And Death is Aubrey Plaza from Agatha All Along. But there was some tarot cards in that show as well. But, I don't know. It's just weird how, he's, bringing back to life, but then all the tarot cards seem to cover him. And then he gets, this smirk. And as soon as he smirked, I wanted him to go, the name's Gambit. mon ami, remember it. You know, like, oh, that fucking last time we saw him in episode 5 of season 1, like, now almost a full season later in episode 6, we get the return of Gambit. He's got white hair now, he's got red glowing eyes, but I think he always kind of had red glowing eyes, but I don't remember him having white hair. I think he had black hair before, so yeah, no, maybe Gambit will be returning, but now with Apocalypse, so maybe he is going to be known as Death now, like maybe he is in the comics, like, I don't know, but oh, it's gonna be a messy week. Oh, next week's gonna be exciting to see that, but I'm also like, god damn, when fucking Rogue finds out, right, like, poor Rogue just lost Magneto now, right, she already lost Gambit, but when she finds out Gambit's alive, but with Apocalypse, this could either go one of two ways. She just immediately goes, fine, fuck it, I'll be on your team, Apocalypse, if it means I can be back with my man, or she, you know, gets pissed and immediately attacks and makes, you know, Gambit come back to his senses, I hope, and we can get Gambit back to the X-Men where he rightfully belongs. But what a good little cliffhanger ending that was. I really enjoyed this episode, and honestly, Polaris, I didn't think I was gonna like her as much as I do. You know, the green hair and how it all flows, and it's like big and like big 80s hair, you know what I mean? Like, she's just a beast, and like her powers seem very powerful. She seems to have the same power set as Magneto, but maybe even more so, and hers glows green rather than yellow. I kind of like that better too. But I'm so glad that she's not on X-Force anymore and she chose to come to the X-Men side of things. But she's back at the X-Mansion while the X-Men are now X-Corp in Genosha, so that's interesting as well. And like, Task Force X seems to be mad about this, but do they have jurisdiction in Genosha? Maybe not, you know, and it seems like Charles, regardless of the president outlawing the X-Men, he's going to fight for mutants, you know, and he's gonna fight for mankind too, but he's gonna fight for mutants in proper rights the way Magneto would have wanted him to, you know? But that's it for me, y'all. I would love to hear your thoughts about episode 6 of X-Men 97 season 2 down in the comment section below, or you can send me your thoughts to my other social media. There's links for those down in the description below. And if you made it this far into the video and you would like to support the channel, the best way of doing that is smashing the like button, commenting down below, hitting that subscribe button if you haven't already, and hit that bell so you don't miss future X-Men 97 breakdown episodes and you get the notifications when those come out. Once again, my name is Big Cam, and I'll see you gorgeous folks in the next video. Peace!